All right. Well, I arbitrarily decided to wait for 30 attendees to join us, and we have crossed that threshold. So I'm going to get started. It's great to have you all this afternoon. My name is Kyle Shelton. I'm the director of the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. Thank you again for being here this morning for our webinar on the coffee supply chain and what goes into delivering your favorite coffee to your store shelf. Excited to hear from Patrick Hessini in a moment here. I just wanted to situate this webinar within the entire Unpacking Freight theme that CTS has been working on this year. It's been a really productive focus for us and all of our partners and stakeholders, many of whom I see on the call today. So appreciation to those of you who have engaged with us on this topic or on many topics that we've touched on this year throughout the calendar year. I always like to say that us wrapping up a theme at the end of the calendar year is not us wrapping up the work on the topic. We know that freight and supply chain issues and research and opportunities are going to continue to come up, and we're really excited to keep working on those with those of you on the call and many of our partners throughout the year. I would really encourage you to check out the Unpacking Freight module site that we have through CTS. I know we'll have a link here in a moment. Also, we have an opportunity tomorrow if you're looking for last minute Friday plans. You can join us for the 28th annual Freight and Logistics Symposium, where we're going to be focusing on really thinking about the connections between land use, supply chain, and freight, and how that impacts regional growth and other topics there with a great audience of folks and great set of speakers. So please check that out. You can see the site again at the bottom of the page here. But the Freight and Logistics Symposium will be tomorrow morning from 8 to 12. And with that, we're going to jump right to the webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome Patrick Hessini, who's the head of supply chain for Cameron's Coffee, joining us today to share this presentation and his perspectives on how supply chain elements impact his work there at Cameron's. And I also want to flag that Patrick is a member of the CTS Executive Committee and appreciate his participation in that and leadership in that, and also sharing his expertise with us today on this. So Patrick, I'll hand over to you, and I'll jump back on to do Q&A. If audience members do have questions during the presentation, please do use that Q&A box, and then I will jump on, ask a couple questions, and take audience questions through to the end of the webinar as well. So Patrick, thanks for being here and take it away.
Wonderful. Well, hello everyone, and Kyle, thank you for that. Thank you for that intro. And as Kyle mentioned, this is a theme that's been going on all year, and I've had the privilege of sitting on the executive committee for the center. And this team, the center, and everything the Center for Transportation Studies does is phenomenal work. And I'm hoping that standard is carried forward in this discussion today. This is going to be a fun discussion. Really, what success looks like from this discussion is that you'll look at your cup of coffee differently as a result of this conversation today. It's an interesting time in this space. A lot of forces globally and locally affecting the coffee business, and it's a wonderful business to be a part of. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and talk first a little bit about Cameron's, just so you know where I'm coming from. I serve as the head of supply chain for Cameron's Coffee. Cameron's is a top 5 brand here in the Midwest, one of the fastest growing brands in the U.S. With given our growth in online business through our own website as well as Amazon and other websites. We have customers now in all 48 lower 48 states. Our focus in terms of our quality and our offering portfolio is to bring you smooth coffee. With our mantra being always smooth, never bitter. And we're also one of the first brands to focus on more of a variety of flavored coffees with unique offerings. We have an interesting combination of small town roots based here just outside the Twin Cities, Minnesota. We are also part of Grupo Nutresa, and Grupo Nutresa is a large food and beverage company based actually in Colombia. And you can look at them, peer companies would be Nestle or Kraft Heinz. But Nutresa has over 46,000 employees globally. So we have this great combination of still being small and being local here in the Twin Cities and serving our markets in the region, while also having the support of the Nutresa organization. And one area that really aligns well between our two organizations is sustainability. Nutresa has been in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index near the top of that list for multiple years. We also have always had sustainability as a cornerstone at Cameron's as part of our brand, and then also not just part of our brand, but in actions we've taken. And one item I just wanted to mention, there's a supply chain story behind this, but we spent a lot of energy innovating with our partners something that is completely compostable, a single serve offering that's completely compostable to the market. This is something that's been out in the market now for several years, but we're very proud of it. It's took a lot of innovation. What's behind this product is all bio resins or food grade products. So this packaging is essentially made of food-based products. And it's just an example of the work we're doing around sustainability. And then also, it's something, if you're concerned at all about microplastics, it's also something that, of course, has no microplastics in it, given its composition. And I share that because it's just the type of innovation that we do here at Cameron's. And then, of course, in addition to sourcing coffee, which is about what this conversation is, there's a lot of great work going on by the team behind the scenes and sourcing these unique products to bring to market for our consumers. This is the last slide I have on Cameron's. I just wanted to go through, just talk about our portfolio, because I think it will give you some context as we talk about the coffee supply chain. For us, this is the end in mind, making sure that we have the product portfolio to serve our customer base. And this includes your classic blends, what you typically will see in Cameron's packaging and in blue packaging. Of course, our organic offerings, as well as our flavored coffees and the varieties we have there that I mentioned. And then on the right side, you'll see the different formats that we bring to market. Briefly about the supply chain team, and for those of you on the call who have a supply chain or transportation background, supply chain can mean different things to different circumstances. And in the case of our team, we have a fantastic team that is represented in all these functions here. Integrated business planning is just, again, taking the demand that we have through our customers and through our retail partners and ensuring that we have the supply, both in terms of coffee and the components that I showed earlier, to make sure that that's supplied to our customer base. Strategic sourcing, both is the main thing we source, of course, is coffee, and that we work closely with our buyer community around the world and in Latin America to ensure we're sourcing coffee, the highest quality coffee at the most competitive price. We also have a great quality management team, and it's not coincidental that I have the quality management and sourcing teams working together. This is a unique attribute of the coffee supply chain, that there's so much variety in the types of coffee that we source, and it has to meet our flavor profile and the high standards that our quality management team has. And so those two teams work very closely together. And I think that's really the secret sauce to a successful coffee company, is having really high standards with those two teams working closely together. Production, of course, is taking the green coffee that I'll talk about here in a minute and turning it into the product portfolio that I shared earlier. And then we also have some talented folks in our engineering and asset management group. Engineering doing the design of the equipment that allows us to make these products, as well as managing all the assets that go along with that, and anything from real estate to our capital equipment. And then logistics and transportation, both inbound, which I'll talk primarily about today. So inbound transportation and logistics coming from the coffee producing regions into our production facility, as well as the transportation out to the customer market. And wrapped around this is just an ongoing theme, a focus of environmental health and safety, and this theme of sustainability that I mentioned earlier. We really infuse that in everything we do, along with the culture of continuous improvement, being better today than we were yesterday, and being better tomorrow than we are today. And the team is really embracing that. So let's now switch over to coffee itself. This is a term some of you may have heard. This is a depiction of the coffee belt. And this is an area where essentially all the coffee in the world is grown. Coffee requires some specific conditions to be grown, and it really is close, relatively close, either above or below the equator, as shown on this slide. And some of the attributes that are important for robust coffee growth include temperate climate where you have some dry periods and moist periods where it's not getting too hot, not getting too cold. So close to the equator is definitely an area that typically is more hot, but you also don't want it to be too hot. So you also find coffee growing in higher elevations closer to the equator where you can get out of the heat a bit and be in higher elevations where you don't get too hot, don't get too cold, have a dry period to get where the coffee plant can get to flower, and then enough moist periods following that to allow for coffee bean growth. And not surprisingly, when you look at coffee origins that we commonly purchase from, they of course are all in this band, in this coffee belt, proximate to the U.S. Of course, Latin America is very important to us. See a lot of countries in Central America as well as further in South America. Ethiopia and Kenya in Africa, and then Vietnam and Sumatra and Indonesia in the Asia Pacific. And there is a little bit of coffee also purchased from Hawaii as our lone coffee producing state in this country. All right, now I'm going to drill into more of a specific case, and I had the privilege a few weeks ago to go to Colombia and meet with our team there, and also go to a coffee farm. I'm going to show you some pictures from that coffee farm. And I really wanted to use that as a way to describe a path, essentially, that a coffee bean takes from being on a tree in Colombia to your kitchen counter, as shown here on the right. And so again, focusing on Colombia, the red dot you see on the left is Cartagena. It's the largest port in Colombia, and that's what was shown. Cartagena is shown in the picture below. And then, what's shown here is the path that typically these shipments would take to get to Shakopee, Minnesota, in the northern part of the U.S. And so, of course, by water to get into the U.S., typically from Cartagena, coffee's coming into two primary ports, and that's Newark, the New York area, as well as Houston. I'll talk more about shipments into New York. And then shipments then, of course, are transported by truck or rail into the Twin Cities area. When we go to the origin point of the coffee, you'll see the country of Colombia. I'm going to show you some footage from a farm in the southern part of the country. So there's also the logistics within the country that have to be dealt with. And that's really where I wanted to start. This is a picture. Actually, I was in this vehicle driving to a coffee farm, and this was a real traffic jam with a horse and some other farm workers on a narrow road that every pound of coffee has to be delivered on this road to market. And this just gives you some idea of the terrain. This is actually a picture of the farm. The small bushes you see on the hillside, those are actually coffee trees. And so that is the typical terrain that you have in a country like Colombia. If you're from the agricultural industry in the United States, you may be used to wide swaths of land with combines that can harvest 12 rows of corn or soybeans at a time. This type of agriculture, of course, is not that. This is a very painstaking work. We're looking at some of these hillsides, and these are at least 45-degree angles. So the workers can be forgiven for skipping leg day, I think, in the weight room. But they are very great shape to harvest the coffee beans in this area. But this is not unusual. It's very typical, and just creates additional challenges bringing coffee to market. And this is really where it all begins in terms of the coffee plant itself. Going from left to right shows the coffee tree. Then, as I mentioned, there has to be the right climate to get to the point where the coffee tree flowers, which then gives you what you need for the coffee cherry to be grown. And some of you may know this, but the actual coffee bean, there are two beans, actually cherry seeds in each cherry, and that is actually what becomes the coffee bean. So again, a fantastic journey from tree to coffee bean, seeing that in the farms there and all the work that goes into that. Then the coffee bean goes through a process to be rinsed and dried, wet milled and dried, and then is taken to a local, more regional mill where there's quality control. The process you see here from the first the truck delivering to the mill, then there's small roasters at the mill to test the properties of the coffee and make sure that this coffee could meet standards for a company like Cameron's. And then you have the milling equipment, which sorts the beans by size as well as removes any debris or foreign objects. And then, of course, the coffee then is stacked and ready for shipment on trucks, larger trucks that then take the larger shipments to port. And for those transportation professionals on the webinar, the upper left slide, the upper left picture, I included that just so you all know that truck drivers waiting to load or unload is not a U.S. only problem. It's a problem essentially everywhere you go, and certainly in the coffee industry as well. All right. Then I mentioned the journey from the port to the U.S. This shows it in more of a complete cycle time, a delivery cycle time from the time it's loaded in this case in Colombia to when it gets to the U.S. destination. So this just gives you line of sight in terms of transportation locally in the country. Then what happens again, in this case, it's the export port at Cartagena. There's the times it takes in some cases, both for procedures to take it from the trucks that I just showed you into a container. And then transit times, this is to New York. In this case, in the pictures you see to the right, the upper picture is Cartagena in Colombia, and the lower picture is the Newark port just outside of New York City. And then the U.S. logistics, in this case, this is a typical rail move from New York to the Minneapolis area, and then local delivery into our location. So there are times where we accelerate this if we have a need for a certain coffee blend, but this is a standard transit time. And I highlight this too. This is just one example. Right, so I showed you a slide earlier with many of the origin points, and the transit times vary. And of course, we have to factor all those different transit times into our inventory management, what inventory we carry on hand here in Minnesota and elsewhere. And the types of transportation we use allow us to also manage our inventory position accordingly. Tied to that also is, and this, of course, has been in the news recently this year with tariffs, how these different scenarios play out in terms of pricing and inflation. The graphic on the left is what I showed earlier with our typical origin points. What can be our typical origin points coming into Minnesota. The pricing for coffee is based on, it's a commodity market, just like corn or soybeans or wheat. So there's a spot market that is referenced, and then there are differentials based on where specifically the location, where the coffee is being sourced from. That will vary in these countries, and there'll be a differential even within the country that will either raise or lower the price, the benchmark price. And then, of course, there's a quality differential as well. And that goes back to the quality testing that I showed you earlier happening in the mill, as well as what takes place within the buyer location, like in our case in Cameron's. And I'm showing the coffee market just to show you some of the upward pressures that we have seen. This is the spot market. This is the Intercontinental Exchange spot market for coffee. Dramatic increases, over 2x increases in price, just in less than 2 years. And I also highlight just the types of variability we have to plan for. For instance, when there were some announcements that there was going to be a relief with tariffs, you saw the C market subside. When that proved not to be the case, we have now had tariffs come off, but the spot market has stayed stubbornly high. And so there's a lot of volatility, some of it induced by geopolitics, some of it just based on supply and demand globally, and the fact that the coffee market, just like any other commodity market, is vulnerable to droughts and other conditions that can constrain supply. And the reason I bring this up for a transportation presentation is because all these different factors have to be taken into account in determining what your source points are, what inventories you have to have on hand, how you need to factor in the cycle time, the supply cycle time that I showed you on the previous slide, which varies based on each of these origin points, and taking into account, of course, pricing conditions and how much price risk we want to take on as a company. And so you might think that after all that, you just deliver it to the plant and make your coffee and you're good. And there is a very important step in between that, and that is our Cameron's quality team. And we have a phenomenal quality team at Cameron's that, even though there was the quality testing done at the mill and samples were sent to us to make sure that the sample met our requirements, there's a bit of a trust but verify dynamic in the coffee space. And of course, we have very high standards at Cameron's, and so our quality team takes samples from the containers that come in and goes through the sampling process. In coffee, it's called cupping. You're actually tasting and smelling the coffee to make sure it matches the flavor profile that you have designated for how you're going to use that coffee in terms of which finished products that specific green coffee product will be used for. And that's just an incredibly important part of this process. It may, a lot of industries, that's not part of supply chain. In this one, it is core to it because it's so closely tied to what coffees we can source and which ones we reject. And there are plenty of coffee samples that come into Cameron's that do not make it into a coffee that comes to your store shelf. And then the stage just before it comes to you is production. I'm not going to go through all of the production steps, but this is, as you now know, green coffee on the left, weighed into the proper quantities for roasting and further processing and packaging. This is one of our roasters, and then the roasted coffee that you see that we all enjoy drinking every day. Sometimes some of us multiple times a day. And again, just showing you, again, not going through all the process steps, but it's those steps that lead us to the portfolio in terms of where I started. There's some other nuances to this. For instance, for organic, we have certain criteria to source organic coffee, where we go through audits every year to ensure that when you look at our organic programs, that goes back to the suppliers we use and ensuring that they're certified organic. We also have a supplier code of conduct. That's also where we've worked very closely with Grupo Nutresa to align with their supplier code of conduct in terms of which suppliers we're willing to use based on sustainability and other standards to ensure they meet our requirements. And my last slide is a snapshot of our website. I mentioned we have we have significant growth through our online platform, CameronsCoffee.com, as well as Amazon. And I see this morning we have a 15% off promotion going on right now. So not to turn this into a marketing presentation, but I saw this morning, and this is one of our flavored offerings that we have just seasonally. And for those of you who are in the northern tier of the United States, like I am, cozy is definitely calling when you look at our forecast for the next few days. So, but this is a quick snapshot. I hope it's valuable, and very much look forward to the discussion and questions.
Thanks so much, Patrick. You had me at eggnog. And as a person who just put 3 bags of coffee in my coffee cart, or in my coffee cart, in my shopping cart the other day because they were all $5 off a pound. I think the 15% off is a good deal right now. So very timely to be talking about this, and I really appreciate you giving us that level of detail. And feel free, folks, to put questions into the Q&A. I'm going to ask a couple to buy you some minutes to put them in there, and then I'll go through and use some of those as well. So appreciate you sharing your questions. Patrick, one that I had that also combines with the question that we got is kind of going back to the source and thinking about the farms and the pictures you showed of that visit. Can you tell us a little bit? There's a specific question about like from the products that are used there, specifically the cherries, once the beans are extracted. Do you know of any other uses that those are put to locally? And then I also had a similar farm side question of like how else does Cameron's or Nutresa engage with the suppliers? Because like that's I imagine one of the first lines of uncertainty, right? Is what if something's going on a farm that you're relying on or on multiple farms? How do you all plan for changes at that local level on the supplier side? So a
Yeah.
two-pronged farm question. How are you all engaged in supporting them? And are you using those products that are being left at the farm or being extracted at the farm in a different way beyond the beans?
Yeah. And on the second question, in terms of using the material beyond the beans, I don't have a good answer for you. What I will tell you are several of the farms we use to have the sustainability certifications that they have must use organic matter back in through composting and back into their farming operation. And so, in fact, there was this, obviously imagine that kind of farming operation with significant size to it, a really elaborate composting area and process for that, and that was part of their certification. They highlighted that as a something that they had to do to get the certifications for organic and for their sustainability certifications. And let's see, your other question was, I think maybe tied to that, just in terms of, and when I mentioned the audits that we have here at Cameron's. Just when we, for instance, if we're going to sell products that are certified organic, we have third-party auditors come in and they do audits and look back at the types of how we chose the suppliers we chose and what criteria we used for that, and making sure that there's a paper trail essentially back to ensuring that we used suppliers that met our requirements and met the requirements of the certifying body. In this case, if it's organic or if it's Rainforest Alliance, those kinds of things, to where there's different certification requirements for those. And so that's how we go about it. There's a much probably broader answer in terms of Nutresa, given Nutresa is based in Colombia and now operates in 18 countries globally, has become truly an international company. But Nutresa has a long, rich history of participating in the community in terms of philanthropy and providing incentives to, throughout its supply chain. I'm not really well versed at all the different programs that they offer, but definitely that's also a reason that they have where they are in terms of the Dow Jones Sustainability
Mm.
Index. It's through programs like that.
Yeah. You're mentioning, bringing it back to Nutresa at that level again. I'm curious, you mentioned some of your peers at the macro level. Are there places, obviously your competitors, but also working with similar sets of challenges and dynamics? Are there ever times where, as sort of like a consortium of companies, those major competitors and peers are trying to address challenges together? That's a theme that has come up for us throughout the years. We've talked with different sectors, like this is an uncertainty that we either can or can't handle individually, so we're doing this as a collective. Are there any within the coffee supply chain? Is that a reality at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'd say within the supply chain functions themselves, uh, I haven't run across like practitioner, um, kind of best where you have your sharing practices, etc. Now there's the National Coffee Association, and of course with the advent of tariffs, they were very, of course, very active, attempting to have the. I mean, in the situation with tariffs for something like coffee, not to turn this into that conversation, but there's just no coffee grown in this country, right? So except for a sliver in Hawaii. So in that case, tariffs were going to affect prices here in this country. But in the case of, say, for instance, transportation practitioners in the coffee space or logistics practitioners in the coffee space, that's something where I don't know of. I think it's more you have larger um, practitioner like Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals or Association of Supply Chain Management, and there's likely you're going to find a coffee subset of practitioners within a segment within those larger bodies that work together and
Right.
collaborate.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions around, we always look to sort of thinking about new technologies or new innovations in this space. Are there, to an extent that you can share, are there ways that you all are thinking about any of the supply chain steps that you're currently undertaking? Are there opportunities of like, oh, there's investigation of a new mode, or I had a curiosity as well. You're talking about the difficulty just from the farm to that first mill, right? Like, what kind of modal shifts are happening? Are there any other technology or innovation pieces anywhere along the line that you guys are excited about or exploring?
Yeah, and I would say it's early days, and I know this is incredibly overused at this point, but AI in supply chain is a real thing. And so I think technology is something that when we look at what 2026 looks like for Cameron's and Nutresa, how we leverage technology to just, for instance, I'd mentioned scenario planning in the previous slide. When you have, in the case of the tariffs or in case of, a drought in a certain area, you have to run different scenarios to be prepared. If I go back, in fact, I'll do that right now. I'm still sharing my screen. Let me see if I can do that here for a second. So maybe this slide right here. Oh, one too far. Yeah, so again, I show here the different origin points, and Brazil is just shown down here as just one of these origin points. But Brazil is, in the case of the United States, 20 to 30% of the coffee supply. And so when Brazil was hit with a 50% tariff, that was a dramatic shift. And of course, when that was a very public thing, so everyone knew that Brazil was going to be is really very going is going to be very challenging for Brazilian coffee to find its way to the U.S. And of course, all the other suppliers that supply the U.S., all these other green triangles you see here, they all knew that that was happening to Brazil. So, given it was so public, given it was so immediate, of course, what happened to pricing in these other area origins? That they of course went up because there was just this massive supply demand imbalance. The more that we can use technology to do scenario planning and understand, okay, if we lose one of these origin locations, how does that then change our portfolio? And that's where transportation mode, Kyle, can come into play in terms of just maybe we do some things collaboratively to where we're opening up different import avenues through Houston, as an example, and having more dedicated rail service coming from Houston up into the Midwest. Those kinds of things that we're talking about. But then the opportunity with AI is to just do those scenario plans based on all the different inputs that can affect a coffee supply chain. And so I think that's the opportunity that we have to look in at 26 is just how we better utilize AI to do a lot of things that would be simulations in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, great example.
Mm-hmm.
A sort of, excuse me, nuts and bolts question is, like many agricultural goods, coffee's perishable at some point. Can you give us a sense? You did a great job of sort of showing the days and the travel time it takes. Are there And I'm curious, especially like during the supply chain crisis during COVID and like, are there times where you're ever like, oh gosh, that shipment of beans is at risk? Like, what's the shelf life of a green coffee bean, and what's it look like to move something like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And of course, also what happened during the high tariff environment is a lot of coffee producers had to buy as much inventory before the tariffs went into effect, right? So warehouse utilization in a tariff environment really goes up because there's a lot of hedging going on by how much inventory you store to get ahead of to help you manage uncertainty. And um, the key with coffee is freshness really after it's roasted. There definitely is a freshness component before, while it's still in the green stage as well, which can be managed based on storage conditions in terms of its shelf life. But our focus is ensuring that once it's roasted, and that's why and we have, of course, you have dates on every bag of coffee, every product you receive from Cameron's, that you'll have a freshness date in terms of when it expires, et cetera. And because after roasting, and packaging helps that as well. If you're able to reduce the amount of oxygen that's in contact with the packaging, that helps. But, or excuse me, in contact with the coffee. But it's more just ensuring that we have fresh coffee coming out of our roasters and going to the store shelf and managing finished goods inventories accordingly. And so that's an ongoing focus for Cameron's, is ensuring our inventories not only where we produce, but and in our regional warehouses, but at the store shelf with the customers, that we're continually paying attention to how that's turned and ensuring that it's staying within the freshness dates that we have.
Thanks. And that actually leads right into another question I was going to ask, which is I really appreciated the focus on the sort of from the farm to the roaster, and a curiosity rose of like the difference between the incoming supply chain and the outgoing supply chain. And you just started to talk about that a little bit, right? Of having the supply available and making sure it can get out to stores. Is there, as you think about from your Shakopee headquarters out to consumers, is that a totally different process? I think that's one of the things we've been exploring with this kind of Freight 101 discussion, and just focusing on freight generally, of just like those dynamics. Is obviously it's a shorter supply chain to go from Shakopee to a store. But is that a whole cloth different process for you all? Is it a whole different set of, checks and scenarios and other things like that?
Yeah, no, great question. We're fortunate to have some wonderful retail partners, retail customers that we work closely with. You'll find Cameron's and Target, Walmart, Costco. If you're in this area, Fleet Farm. And so we work very closely with those retail networks, plenty of grocery networks as well, pure grocery players as well, not just in the Midwest, but in other parts of the country. And then I would say the one thing that is really and this is affecting all businesses, but definitely it's happening to us. We're seeing a wonderful growth in digital and online demand, and so that requires a different transportation and fulfillment model, right? So we're doing a lot of shipments of uh, you know smaller packages versus full pallets, right? And so That requires a different type of transportation, a different type of coordination with with a distribution type freight operation. And so that is where we're evolving to right now, is to ensure that we're always going to have a strong brick and mortar presence in terms of being in on the store shelf, but also how we evolve. And this is another area where technology like AI can help us, just how we make sure that we have the ability to fulfill orders reliably, just the website I showed you with the 15% promotion, right? A 15% promotion leads to more demand, and how we plan for that and ensure that we can supply our customers is something that's a growing part of our portfolio, just given the importance of online.
Yeah, nice. Um, I was curious as well. There have been a couple questions too. I know you've mentioned Newark and Houston as the two main ports. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is that just a quirk of geography? Do they have other infrastructure that is particularly conducive to getting the products up to Shakopee, or is that based on your agreements and the companies you're working with? Like what,
Yeah,
how does that decision making happen?
no, it's a great question, and I will say this too, that those two ports fit our needs in terms of where our market is. There are other ports, of course, that receive coffee into the U.S. If you think of brands that are prominent on the West Coast, they have the ability to ship to leave a country like Colombia, export out of Colombia at some smaller ports that are more on the west coast of Colombia, and go around the Pacific into a port on the west coast, whether it's Long Beach or Tacoma or Seattle. Um, but yeah, there's nothing. These are containers, right? So, um, these are containers that just so any container port can handle coffee. There's nothing unique in that regard. It's more making sure that you can handle those containers at your destination locations, and we have a great team that does that here in Shakopee.
We also, during these webinars, got to hear from, basically every modal group that's moving freight. And I had a question, a couple other questions as well about sort of uh, the nimbleness and the responsiveness within a supply chain. So, obviously you have contracts with different carriers and others to move loads. Is that how flexible are you? How quickly, given all the disruptions you've described, right? Like whether it's the supply, a tariff impact or a supply impact at the source, or, a delay of a ship or something like that. Like how nimble and moving do you have to be to say, okay, well, we thought we were going to use, this this carrier from Houston, but now we might have to shift to Newark. Like how often does that happen? How quickly do you have to be able to respond, and how easy is it to change some of those nitty-gritty details?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I will tell you, if there is a silver lining of the tariff environment over the last year, is we have gotten much more nimble and responding to unforeseen situations, both in terms of supply as well as, of course, pricing. There's always to manage pricing on the store shelf. You always have to be thinking of what you're paying for coffee at the same time. So when you lose, again, going back to my earlier comments, when you lose an origin, how you respond to that is super critical. And a lot of that comes with us working closely with our green coffee buying team, and then the relationships that we're building throughout the supplier network. I showed you an example of us buying coffee, on site in Colombia. We also have partners where we can buy coffee in other locations that may be sourced out of Colombia but have now moved to another location. The challenge with that is you have to then make sure it meets your quality standards, freshness standards, etc. So one thing that I mentioned my high praise for our quality team. I would say through all this, you're trying to balance being nimble, but also making sure that you're not compromising quality standards. And our team's done a great job of, I think, threading that needle. But that's the one thing that I think is unique. for me, Kyle, and I think maybe for others on this video is that on this webinar is that the quality part of this really adds another wrinkle. You can't just go and immediately replace supply with another supplier like you can in many supply chains. It has to meet your flavor profiles and has to be the type of coffee that you can fit into the portfolio that I showed. And so the team working together and being able to do that quickly is really important to us being nimble, but the coffee industry has some unique complexities based on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's sort of the specificity and almost the bespokeness of a particular
Yeah,
product, right? It's not something that
for
you're
sure.
aggregating and then turning into a different product, right? Where you maybe can mask some inconsistencies or different flavors or things like that. So it's a really good point. My last question for you, Patrick, again, sort of in the spirit of these webinars being like, let's teach people about all these intricacies of supply chain. I'll say, when I was actually applying for this role with CTS, it was the first slide on my presentation was the Ever Given stuck in the Suez Canal. And that was one of these moments where I was like, I don't know what else to really say behind this, but I know this is a really big problem for transportation. And that's been sort of a kernel for me leading up to this theme of like, this being my opening message for this theme was so few
Mhm.
of us like are like, well, I don't think about this until it's the package that I ordered isn't here yet,
Sure.
or the product that I need isn't on the shelf. So I think I'm sure you've touched on elements of this answer already, but I'm just curious if there's one thing that you would leave to audience members, folks who will watch the webinar in the future, who maybe aren't in the supply chain space and specifically the coffee supply chain. Is there something
Yeah.
that you would want them to either know or to think about the next time they're pouring that cup of coffee, or appreciate about the process that you all go through to get it to us?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. I would just say there are just wonderful, when I'm talking now specifically about the coffee industry itself, there are just wonderful people in this space. I was able, when I was out at the farm that I showed slides of, where I had, of course, pictures with the farmers, husband and wife operation. I didn't have permission to use their pictures, so I kept those pictures out of the slides. But just wonderful people throughout the supply chain, and but um, I would say for those of you who maybe don't think about supply chains every day, if there's an industry that or a segment of the economy or an area you're interested in or passionate about, um, that getting into the supply chain and how things actually get to you or get on the store shelf, it really can tell you a lot about what happens behind the scenes is often kind of it's just an interesting part of understanding. Like for instance, in the coffee space, you have a lot of different. We talk a lot about the different flavor profiles we have. There's a lot of people, as an example, in the coffee industry that they are fanatics when it comes to how they prepare their coffee, and they have a certain way they prepare it to get the flavor they want. But as I hope today showed, is there's a lot of variables behind the scenes and things that may not be as interesting as what type of French press or what type of pour over system do you have, but that really come into play in understanding a segment like coffee from end to end. So I'll just leave it at that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Patrick. Appreciate all of those insights. I'm a pour over household, so I might go make some more today, even though I've probably had enough coffee already. But you can never have too much. That's probably
Never
not true
can.
either. But really appreciate you taking the time and sharing such good insights about the work you all are doing at Cameron's and the broader coffee supply chain. I hope everybody who joined us today enjoyed it as well. We will be posting the video if you think there are others in your life who need to learn more about the coffee supply chain. It'll be available on the Unpacking Freight site as well in the coming days. Thanks to audience members for great questions and for joining us during your lunch hour today. And hope everybody has a safe end of the week and stays warm out there.
Yeah. Thank you. Warm holiday wishes. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.